Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is I, Mighty Sophia, here to break down for you guys the final episode of Season 3 of Bates Motel. We are on episode 10, Unconscious. So, spoiler alerts before we dive into the mad thick of things, as I shall be bearing all in this review. And without further ado, let us get our little foots all wet in here and dive right in. Let's do it. So, as many of you might be, I am feeling a great many things. I guess the best way I can describe it is it's equal parts relief and just absolute terror. And yet, at the same time, there's even a beauty and a lightness in that terror, because at long last, we are completely over the edge of the ravine and just diving into the Niagara Falls of Psycholand. That's how I'm currently feeling, and that excites me, and it scares me, because the end game has officially begun, and I don't know what to do about that. I don't know how to handle it. I knew that this was coming. I called the episode long ago, and for any of you who have been watching the show intently and who knew that Bradley was returning, we all knew that she was simply going to be a catalyst for Norman's next step, essentially, in what is effectively the opposite of a recovery program, but rather a discovery of the mother within. There's a little mother inside all of us, I think. Some might call it a dark passenger, but you know, potatoes. Sorry, I have to do a little bit of cross-show universe referencing there. But at long last, Mother has really come out to play, and might I just say that I loved the creative choice with how the showrunners elected to have Norman do this kill. Now, there are some out there in the world who are theorizing that since Norman was technically the only one to see Bradley, that perhaps she was still a figment of his imagination. But I would not say that that's the case, because the show takes time to show Bradley on her own, even after she meets back up with Norman. And I guess you could still try to argue that Norman's imagining her going and ransacking her mother's house to get all this jewelry and cash that translates into $30,000 that they do nothing with. Like, I still am confounded by the complete and utter lack of logic that went into this whole ridiculousness. She goes away to disappear and then comes back to disappear again and still has no semblance of an idea. You have all this money and you just say, oh, we have money, we can do anything. Let's just see how far the car goes. And with her wit and intellect, clearly she would probably think that the car is done by the time that the gas tank is empty, because this woman has no brain activity. Can you really call it a murder if there's nothing going on upstairs? You tell me. Anyways, I don't believe that it's a figment of his imagination, because, and I think that the showrunners have confirmed as much, that this did in fact happen, that Norman and Mother had in fact in that moment become one flesh and one mind. And it was really fun with the editing work that we got to see there, what with we see Norman getting out of the car after he forces Bradley to pull over. Mother's in the back seat insisting that she have an audience with Bradley. And Norman then proceeds to tell her that this shall be the case and she shall indeed talk to Mother, and proceeds to get out and head around the back, and then just in a split second, it's Norman going around the back of the vehicle, tracing his hand along the frame of the car, and then in a split second, there's Norma tearing the car door open, forcing her out into the woods and bashing her head over and over again against a rock with the, I'm trying to think what the quote was. I tweeted it out because I was very excited about that moment. So now I am going to use my own Twitter feed as notes because that was a great moment. Oh yes, it's the part where no one can ever get between me and my son. Just every, like, bam, 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 bam. It was so... And then, you know, the camera pulls away from her face just long enough for us to focus on the lifeless form of Bradley, which was a great sigh of relief for me. You know, such euphoria arose in my soul, and then we see the blood all over Norman's hands. No longer mother. So he is back into himself and goes to the docks with Mother, who insists that she's going to take care of everything and he needn't worry about a thing. And they brought back my favorite quote that I have been referencing for like at least the past half of the season. What was spoken in the very first episode of the show, there's a cord between our hearts, and Mother expresses this to him and says that there is nothing that can come between them. There's no way that they can be apart, and they will be together forever. And we got a fun little Psycho reference, a bit of parallelism for you guys. What with the sinking of Bradley's car, which is exactly what happened to Marion in the Hitchcock Psycho movie. So that was a very fun reference. You know, this show has found a lot of its visual roots and in kind of the way that it builds up tension from the Hitchcockian school of horror and suspense. And then we get to see these other moments that intertwine, and it's just so crazy to see how this entire world of Psycho is being built up, and it's leading into the story that we know, and yet everything is just so enriched. And I think, honestly, if I had to pinpoint a favorite part of the episode for me, it was just in the expressions of Freddie Highmore's face. You have to watch every episode twice, and I don't even have the opportunity to do this, and so I'm sure that I am missing just a world of meaning and subtext, but watch his face, and you will see everything at work underneath. Every thought that is flickering behind his eyes is just so beautifully and powerfully and scarily expressed in his face, like we see when Bradley is trying to coax Norman into leaving Mother, and then Norma, let's say Norma, I don't want to get things too twisted now, because it's gonna get a whole hell of a lot more convoluted in the days to come. But so when he is contemplating, injuring myself here, leaving Norma, Norman is contemplating leaving Norma, and then watch his face again in that scene as Norma is trying to convince Norman that he may need to leave her to get help. And everything that happens with Norman in this episode is just, it's an array of forces that are trying to come between him and the relationship that he wants to have, up until the point that he is packing his bags and getting ready to flee from Norma, and telling her in this very lucid moment that you're awful and you're patronizing me, and just all of these daggers into her heart. And such a swift and powerful scene, what with him bursting out of his room, rushing down the stairs. Norma tries to stop him, and she ends up spilling down backwards over the stairs with the suitcase opening, and in her immediate impulse, as soon as Norman catches up to her, is to knock him down. And we know that she has got the skills in that respect. So there they are, broken and battered by each other, and Norma is dragging him into the basement, which has never looked more sinister. Oh my goodness, just the lighting. I mean, has Norma been paying her bills? Has she been paying the utility, electricity? She taking care of things on that front, because it's not really looking like it in the downstairs. But I mean, to be fair, nobody was down there at the time. She had, of course, collected all of Norman's birdies and beautiful art and shoved them into a bag, so Lord knows what activity has been going on down there. But yeah, like, I love the horror notes that we kind of had woven into the episode. It's never full on classic horror scary, but it is that suspense factor which I so adore about Hitchcock films. I've never been just a straight horror junkie myself. Suspense is really where it's at for me. And if there is good suspense within a horror film or some kind of media portrayal that is in the horror genre, define that how you will, then I'll go for it, because that for me is really the divisive factor, and it's made me fall so head over heels in love with the show, falling down backwards over the stairs with Norman's suitcase, you know, splattering everywhere. Like, there was just so many brilliant moments in this episode. Now, before I go back to kind of wrapping up my thoughts about the whole Norma mother trifecta, I do want to touch on other aspects of the show that are going on and kind of address some things that are a little bit wonky in the show for me. But at the same time, I can see why the writers choose to do what they do, and it makes more sense than some of the other decisions I've seen made in shows. But what I do mean to say is that a lot of the elements of the show that are not like Norman and Norma, kind of, the clock like seems to reset every midnight. And by midnight, I mean every finale. So Bob Paris is now officially out of the picture. Alex Romero is continuing to go down a darker and darker path, strategically taking out all of these adversaries who are not only threatening him in his place of power in White Pine Bay, but also threatening the Bates family. And the decision that he makes with Bob Paris, I believe, is very much about Norma and Norman and protecting them. When he goes to visit Norma at the hotel and sees her completely deflated, exhausted, uttering things like, we're all doomed in the end anyway, right? Maybe fate is taking over. And in that instance, I think that he decides, I'll be the fate. And he enacts his own kind of justice. But I mean, I have to admit that I was actually a little bit bummed to see Bob Paris so swiftly out of the picture, because what they were setting up at the beginning of the season was this whole kind of murder mystery plot, like with the dead women. Why was it that Annika made off with the flash drive? And of course, that was all, you know, we see how that went down once Romero reacquired the flash drive instead of returning that to Bob Paris and letting him continue to have his power in the town. He takes it to the DEA and uses this as the opportunity to get Bob Paris right where he wants him. And so I guess that all of the intrigue and stuff kind of boils down to what's going on in the character of Romero, which I do appreciate, because he has evolved into such a fascinating minor character. And at times I'm more invested in what's going on with Romero than I even am with Dylan, simply because Romero is actually far more enmeshed and entrenched in this. In some ways. I mean, the relationship that he has is quite different, but I enjoy all the tension and twists and turns between him and Norma, and I do think that they are holding him off to be her final lover until her dying day. I think that's precisely what he is being saved up for, but they're not just going to put him in a little box, you know. He's got quite a powerful role to play in the city, does away with Bob, does away with the imminent threat that is facing Norma, at least one of them. what she thinks is the threat that was originally Bob Paris digging into her past, uncovering what truly transpired and getting Norman taken away from her. So I wonder if they are gonna get that hole filled up in front of the hotel next season. Hopefully so. But yeah, well, it'll be really interesting to see where they decide to pick up in the next season, actually. I have no idea how they're going to do that, whether they're going to, you know, take it from the top, or, because we think about how things ended with the first season with the death of Miss Watson, and where they picked up after that, and it was all kind of sunshine and roses, with the hotel, aside from Norman dealing with the fallout of Miss Watson's death. But this is a whole different animal, and it's a whole different mother who is involved in what went down with Bradley. At any rate, I'll finish up kind of the other stuff that's going on. So we also have Emma finally preparing to go get her lung transplant. Dylan's money was good. She has the opportunity. She's made it to the top of the list, and she's going to Portland to hopefully get a new set of lungs, new lease on life. And I knew that there was going to be a resistance on her part to have this surgery done, and my prediction was pretty spot on. The fact that she wants to have some semblance of control over her body, and the only control that she knows is just facing the inevitability of death and trying to enjoy what's in front of her, come whatever. I mean, she's very much adapted to this condition that she has had for her entire life, and it's scary to have this glimmer of hope. And that's something that's very much recurring in the show, is wanting to cling on to hope in general, and realizing how precarious and how fleeting that can be. Emma, of all people, understands this. And so she gets to tell Dylan about this, what's going on inside of her mind, and how she knows that she has this tiny little window to get out there and to get the help that she needs, and knows that it seems so irrational to reject it. But again, she is afraid of that rejecting, of her body rejecting the organ that she tries to get. And that's a very scary thing, to feel like your body is rebelling against you. And that's what's going on with Norman right now, in fact. I mean, it is his mind that is rebelling against the rest of him. Although I mean, that's a weird thing to say, because aren't you kind of your mind, consciousness? I don't know, I'm getting way too into the metaphysical stuff. But, yeah, that's kind of an interesting parallel going on there, too. Dylan gets to be there for her in that, and of course really wants her to go through with it, partly because he made the sacrifice to get her the money to do it, but he also really likes and cares for her, and so that's a big piece of it too. Culminates in the sweet little kiss. You know, it wasn't the Norman and Norma kiss that we had once upon a time, but I think there's going to be more of that down the road, and I actually read an interview with the cast. There has been discussion of another kiss coming in the future, but they want to be very careful about when they actually do that, and I think that that's a good idea, because, I mean, are we going to have them, like, making out up until the dying day? Like, we don't want to push it too fast. Make all of us fans anxious. But it was good to have that moment of peace and of moving forward into the unknown for Emma, and for her to at least be away from this craziness. You know, I've been so scared for her ever since the beginning, and so I don't know what all of this is going to look like, or how Norman is going to react when he inevitably discovers what is going on between Dylan and Emma. Granted, he's so wrapped up in Norma and Mother at this point, it's hard to say, but as the Norman on the outside tries to cling to the things that he's known, it's difficult, and it's difficult to say, too, what Mother is going to be whispering into his ear as well, because she could have quite a few opinions on a lot of matters, you know. And I think that's something that we're going to see a lot more of very soon here. So there's that. A little bit of happiness, which we know is going to translate into great sadness. But in the meantime, you know. So Romero continues to be interesting. I don't know what's going on with Chick. And Caleb disappears. So it's just kind of like, okay, he's gone. Cool. You know, like I just never really had an affection for that character, never sat right with me, and it's just sort of adios. and Adios Bradley. I mean, there's a lot of bidding adieu. And it's just funny how it's like everybody around Norman and Norma and the Bates clan is like getting plucked off the tree like cherries, and yet the Bates tree grows ever taller and more convoluted. And that truly is the core of the show and what really matters. And I just don't want the show to feel like they have to just kind of do all the crazy drug war crime of the city dance around this core family struggle and just sort of squander that. Like, there's so much that's really interesting about it. And I want to kind of feel like there's something else enduring in the background that continues to go as we get further into what's happening with Norman. But anyway, so that's kind of the rest of the stuff. But I do want to say just how interesting it is, the evolution of Mother. That's something that I want to end this vlog with. Recall the first time that we met Mother, which was when Norman was with Miss Watson. Now, that Mother was a very, very, very different Mother from the Mother that we have seen here at the end of season 3. Now, the first Mother, first iteration of her, was very prim, proper, black dress, hair pulled back. I mean, even, it's so funny, having not recently looked at a picture and only going off of what's in my memory, I almost remember it as if she looked almost like a nun. I mean, so austere and so intense, and you know what you have to do, and she's very cold and commanding. It's not this, I'm gonna take care of everything for you. And at this point, the blackouts that Norman is experiencing, it's all so... He's been pretty lucid up until the final breaking of the straw. I mean, we've seen many examples of him losing control, but not in a way that seems lasting, not in a way that seems like the end game is here. The domino has been hit and the rest are cascading down. It doesn't quite feel that way. So the first Mother is this very cold and commanding presence that is telling him to do things, and you know what you need to do, you know what you need to do. Now, the next Mother that we start to get is a very seductive Mother. Always in blue, always in her pretty light dresses, and just moving very, very sensuously, very much the seductress and the temptress. And therein we start to get this whole idea of, I'm going to take care of things for you. It's not just Mother saying, you must do this, but we are going to do this together. And so that becomes very, very interesting. You know, she's always got kind of a bit of a smirk on her face, and it's just ever present. And especially what stands out in my mind is the final episode of season 2, when she tells him that she's got the whole thing under control. He's going into his psychiatric evaluation, or whatever the test was at the time, and so she's there in that moment. And we get more of the seductive temptress Mother in this season as well. Now, what's interesting is the most recent Mother is actually very difficult to distinguish from Norma. She looks a lot more like Norma does now, and doesn't even always dress that differently sometimes. I mean, especially, I think of this last episode. She's wearing that same dress that Norma wears whenever she goes out at night. She looks almost exactly like the Norma that we know on the outside and who we know to be true. And so she is kind of blended into Norman's reality, and we see exactly how things are going to start going down for him, because she is starting to become indiscernible from Norma herself. Norma and Mother are truly becoming one. And it's quite uncanny in that way, because she isn't always completely overtly seductive as she has sometimes appeared in times past. Much more reasonable, much more feasible, much more tangible. And the more like the more like Mother, or, I'm trying to think of how to say this. The more Mother is like Norma Bates in real life, the more convoluted it all becomes, because he's not necessarily trying to fight her off if she's not actively telling him you must kill, if she's not actively trying to seduce him and put him in a place that he knows is wrong and where he doesn't want to be, but she is simply just being, all the while inviting him a little bit closer. It's so, there's so many ways to break it down. And I read somewhere, even earlier today, the idea that perhaps at some point Norman will be trying to kill Mother, perhaps, you know, as things continue to develop and he sees more of the Mother in his mind, he tries to kill her, but in the process kills Norma, which is quite the possibility. I mean, you think of how it's supposed to go down, canonically speaking, killing his mother and her lover, but we don't know the exact set of circumstances that the writers are going to land upon in the end, and so it keeps us hanging in suspense, baby. So thank you guys so much for watching my reviews this season. It's been great, marvelous fun. You can find a link in the description. Blah, blah, blah. I'm like tripping over my tongue. You can find a link below that has all my Bates Motel everythings and other links to the rest of my reviews. I love you all so much. I will try and respond to whatever comments I get the chance to. Anything that I happen to miss, any revelations that you had, please share them with me by all means. I'll still be going with Game of Thrones, hopefully bringing some other videos into the mix, and maybe even a Bates Motel parody, which I've been devising. And then, y'all know what's coming next is Hannibal, so stick around for that. I love all you dears oh so very much. And as always, I will be back before you know it.